Hi. You should be able to hear me now. Thank you. I'm sorry. You're not a real streamer unless you talk on stream with your mic muted. That's the condition. Okay, I think everything should be updated. How are you, Terry? It's good to see you. I am just going to talk. Well, not talk while I eat, but I'm gonna eat. No worries, I'm glad I popped in before you started reading. Thank you for popping in. Welcome for popping in. So I need to figure out my stream schedule, but I work 9 to 1 tomorrow and Friday. So that will put me streaming in the afternoon, but I do need to figure out when exactly and what we will be streaming. And we are still raising money for Play to Beat Brain Cancer for the month of May. Yeah, I think it's still at $15. And there are incentives. There are rewards if you donate at a certain tier level. I've not eaten lunch yet, so don't mind me. Get some lunch, Terry. It's that time. We're just gonna do some chill music until I figure out if there's any good, like, theme music for the book. So, Keegan texted me. What was I gonna say? I was gonna say something. Well, nobody texted me. Well, I can text you if you really want me to, but I'm kind of talking to you right now, so. I was gonna say something important, but, I totally forget. Schedule, food. I don't remember. $11 days. No, that wasn't it. Still need to figure out my book. crap. I meant to pick something up today. I wonder what time they close. $4:30. They should close at 5. That's dumb. Figuring out our day, the stream, starring Paige. Well, I'm trying to eat before I start reading. I don't want to completely bore you to death, so I'm also trying to make conversation. How is your day, Terry? Just blah. I'm sorry. I hope it gets somewhat more enjoyable for you. Do you like the music? Only time will tell. This is true. Music is pleasant. Okay. All right. Well, here's another thing. V. Budke. If I can get a shout out for V. Budke, she will be streaming right after me. And I'll probably try to raid her. Thank you. Last playing SpongeBob's Truth or Square. She's doing Best Wednesday today with Holland. I like to go out and support her, so we'll keep an eye on her stream and see if we can do a raid over to her channel when she starts streaming. Should be around 3 p.m. Central, depending on if she's running late or anything like that. So, we are reading from the original story, 1937, The Whispering Statue. And it has an illustration in the front. It says, the girls pulled the unconscious man aboard. And because it's the original version, it's a little bit longer. It's over 200 pages. The other ones top out at about 180. That seems safe. And the story could be slightly different, so we'll see if my book description under my book command is accurate. We'll just have to wait and see. So without further ado, we're starting with Chapter 1, Togo's Prank. And we'll remember fondly that Togo is Nancy's dog. Nancy drew, her hands thrust deeply in her sweater pockets.
There's more than one kind? Did you make some of those up? I think I'll have sleepy time. Sounds good to me.
What? Togo was the name of a sub sandwich shop where I was in for a while? That's cool. Sorry, that was weird. Okay. Nancy drew, her hands thrust deeply in her sweater pockets, paused in front of the Marvin residence. She gave a soft call. That was weird. Almost at once, the door flew open and 2 girls came outside. One was Bess Marvin, the other a girl cousin of Bess named George Fane. "Am I late?" Nancy inquired as her chums joined her. "I hurried as fast as I could, but everything seemed to delay me." We'll be in plenty of time for the opening ceremonies at the park," Bess replied carelessly. "The program isn't scheduled to start until 2 o'clock. "I'd just as soon as miss the speeches anyways," George laughed, falling into step with her companions. "I'm mostly interested in seeing the grand new park." The 3 girls who lived in River Heights were walking toward Harrison Park to attend the formal opening exercises. The property itself, comprising many acres, was located on the outskirts of the city, along the banks of a small lake. It had been willed to River Heights by the late Mary Harrison, a wealthy old lady who had set aside ample funds to maintain the grounds as a place of beauty and recreation. "It will be the very nicest park in the city," Bess remarked enthusiastically as she walked swiftly on. "I hear, too, that part of the lake is to be cemented off for a swimming pool." As they approached the arched entrance gate, the girls heard band music and hastened their steps. It was Saturday afternoon, and the streets were crowded with cars, while the walks were thronged with men, women, and children in a gay holiday mood. "Oh, isn't that garden gorgeous?" Bess murmured a moment later, catching a glimpse of red, lavender, and yellow flowers directly ahead. Neither Nancy nor George replied, for they had heard a soft pad-pad behind them, and had turned to see who was following so closely at their heels. "Why, it's a little dog!" Nancy exclaimed in delight. "Isn't he cute?" She did not need to coax the bull terrier to come closer, for he trotted up to be petted. As the Drew girl stooped to pat his well-shaped head, he leaped at her in friendly fashion and pawed her dress. "What's your name, doggy?" she asked, pushing him from her. "And where's your collar?" "Evidently he's run away," George declared. "Of course he's not a stray. You can tell he's a thoroughbred." "Yes, he looks like a valuable dog," Nancy agreed, glancing about the park in search of the animal's owner. "But he seems to be lost." "Oh, come along, girls," Bess urged impatiently. "Time's going. There's so much to see." "I suppose the dog's master is somewhere in the park," Nancy remarked as the 3 friends walked on again. She glanced over her shoulder. "Why, the little scamp is following us." "He seems to have adopted you, Nancy," George chuckled. "I hope he doesn't trail us all around the park." Nancy halted and sternly ordered the dog to go home. He retreated a few feet, and the girls continued on their way again. A moment later, the terrier was trotting along beside them. Nancy tried once more to send him away, but was unsuccessful. "You don't say go home as if you really mean it, Nancy," George criticized her chum. "I'll show you how to get rid of the little scamp." She picked up a small stick and lightly touched the dog. He regarded her reproachfully, but would not retreat. "Oh, let him follow us if he likes," Nancy urged. "He's such a friendly little fellow, and we may run into his master somewhere in the park." "I wish we knew his name," Bess remarked. "We might call him Togo." Togo trotted along contentedly at Nancy's heels, and presently the girls forgot about him as they paused to admire a fountain. Suddenly they were startled to hear a man shout angrily, "Say, get your dog out of that flower bed!" In horror, the girls whirled around to see Togo digging furiously for a bone he thought was there. Plants and dirt were flying in every direction. Nancy and her chums called sternly to the dog, but he paid no heed. Finally, George caught the mischievous little fellow in her arms and yanked him out of the bed. He had made several ugly holes in the soft earth. Broken flowers were scattered over the grass. "You have no right to bring a dog into a park unless you keep him on a leash," said a bystander to the girls. "The flower bed is now practically ruined." "He's not our dog," George replied, flushing deeply. She put the squirming Togo down on the ground. As the 3 girls scurried away, conscious that many persons were regarding them with disapproval, the terrier followed them again. Oh, what shall we do with the dog? Bess moaned under her breath. Everyone thinks he's our pet. A park policeman will be after us if we're not careful, Nancy said uneasily. Please go home, Togo, or if you don't know where home is, go somewhere. The terrier stared at her almost impishly. After a while, he moved away, and the girls hoped that he would leave them. The next instant, they were dismayed to see him dart toward the lake where 3 swans were gliding serenely along close to shore. Barking excitedly, Togo ran along the bank, making little dives at the frightened birds. "Oh, capture him before he swims in," Bess wailed. "That dog will cause our arrest before he gets through." Nancy and George cornered the animal, pulling him forcibly away from shore. They scolded him severely, but their words were only wasted. The mischievous terrier barked, frightened children by wild little darts toward them, and cast a wistful eye at every flower bed they passed. Soon the girls felt that everyone in their vicinity was regarding them with disapproval. Over and over they explained that Togo was not their dog, but with the little fellow following so worshipfully at their heels, they could not expect to be believed. Several times, Nancy and her chums tried to sneak away, but the alert Togo always found them again. "Oh, let's sit down on this bench and try to keep the scamp out of mischief for a minute or two," Nancy sighed, indicating a seat which offered an excellent view of the lake. "Is it safe, do you think?" Bess murmured. "The swans may come sailing along." "Oh, I'll keep my hands on Togo every second," Nancy declared. "If this dog were mine, I'd get a good strong leash for him." "He may be your dog if the owner isn't found," George chuckled. "I can see where your work is cut out for you." "Oh, no," Nancy corrected quickly. "If the owner doesn't show up, he's your dog, George. You saw him first." "Well, we'll let Togo decide for himself," George laughed. "Of course he'll choose you." Presently, 2 women sat down on a bench nearby. Nancy promptly tightened her hold upon Togo, for she could not tell what he might try to do. The newcomers were well dressed, and from their appearance and general conversation, Nancy gathered that the older of the 2 might be one of the speakers on the dedication program. "I'm dreadfully nervous," the silver-haired lady confessed to her companion. "You see, this is the first time I've ever addressed such a large audience, and the first time that I have faced a microphone. I'm so afraid I'll forget my speech." "Oh, nonsense, Mrs. Owen," the other replied encouragingly. "If you weren't a capable speaker, the Federation of Women's Clubs never would have selected you as their representative here today." "Oh, it's a high honor, and that's why I'm so uneasy. I have had no radio experience. If you don't mind, I think I'll just run through my notes again." The woman addressed as Mrs. Owen opened her handbag. She removed several folded papers and scanned them intently. "I've heard my mother mention Mrs. Owen," Bess whispered to her chums. "She's a very prominent club woman who has made dozens of speeches around River Heights. I can't imagine her being nervous." After scanning her notes for several minutes, Mrs. Owen glanced at her watch and arose. "I'm scheduled to give my talk in exactly 30 minutes, so I think we may as well go to the stands right away." The women walked along slowly. Not until they had disappeared from view did Nancy notice that Mrs. Owen had left her handbag lying on the park bench. "Oh, the poor woman will be terribly upset when she discovers her loss," she cried. "We must give the purse to her before she makes her speech." The girls moved forward to pick up the bag. Before they could do so, Togo, who seemed to guess their intention, darted ahead of them directly for the bench. "Togo!" Nancy called sharply, but she was unable to distract the dog. He leaped upon the vacant seat, and to the horror of the girls, picked up Mrs. Owen's handbag in his mouth. "Bring it here!" Nancy commanded firmly. Instead, Togo jumped down, and with the purse still in his jaws, he trotted playfully in the opposite direction. "Oh, he's going toward the lake!" Bess cried in alarm. "Togo!" George screamed, starting to run after the terrier. It was exactly the wrong thing to do, for Togo, thinking that the girl wished to frolic with him, leaped faster and faster to the very edge of the lake. There he hesitated only an instant before plunging in. With the pocketbook still grasped in his mouth, he swam away, head held proudly out of the water. "Oh, what shall we do now?" Bess moaned. As she had feared, Togo, after swimming out a short distance, had dropped the purse. The mischief accomplished, he then swam back to shore. Shaking the water from his sleek coat, he looked at Nancy as if expecting praise. "Mrs. Owen's speech is in the bottom of the lake," George exclaimed in dismay. "Now what will she do?" "Let's get away from this park before anything more happens," Bess shuddered. "Let's go home." Nancy shook her head. "We must find Mrs. Owen and try to explain. There's just a chance that the pocketbook can be brought up." "Not in time for her speech," Bess replied gloomily. "The water's too deep for wading, even if we should want to ruin our clothing. There's nothing we can do." Nancy held a different opinion. She had marked the exact spot where the bag had dropped in the water, and she believed that if she could only find the park workmen in time, they might drag the lake and retrieve the purse within a few minutes. "Wait here," she commanded her chums. "Don't take your eyes from the spot where Togo dropped the bag. I'll be right back." Nancy darted away, hurrying directly to the speaker's stand where Mrs. Owen was engaged in excited conversation with several of the officials. "Oh, I don't know what to do," the woman was saying nervously. "I've just discovered my purse is missing, and all my notes are in it. I can't make a speech without them." "Oh, but you must, Mrs. Owen," one of the men urged. "We are depending upon you to make the dedication. No one else is prepared." "It's not merely the speech," the woman continued in distress. "The bag also contained considerable money, and a gift which I was asked to present today. It's from the Federation of Women's Clubs." "We'll do the best we can," an official returned grimly, "but I'm afraid we'll not recover your bag before the ceremonies start, if we recover it at all." Nancy had reached the platform in time to hear the last remark. She pushed through the group of men and reached Mrs. Owen's side. "I can tell you what became of your bag," she cried. "Oh, where is it? Where's my purse?" Briefly, Nancy revealed the prank played by the mischievous Togo. The woman sagged into the nearest chair. "Then my notes, the gift, everything is gone." "I saw exactly where the handbag went down," Nancy said eagerly. "If the park workmen will help, I think we can recover it in time." "In 20 minutes?" Mrs. Owen gasped, glancing at her watch. "Oh, it isn't possible." "Yes, it is," Nancy insisted firmly, "but there's not a second to waste. We must act." End of chapter 1. Hello, husband. I thought your reaction was to her pocket stuffing ways, not the music. "Hello, gonna listen while I drive home from work." "Okay, V, be safe. Be safe driving home from work." "Thank you for shouting out, V." "Again, 'cause you worth." "Hopes the dog talks." That would be nice. "Hello, brain love. I'm going to test something." "Okay. What would you like to test, dear?" Just sipping my tea. Welcome for clapping. Thank you for clapping. Bow. Bow. And honey, if you're still here, am I picking you up at 5? Is that happening? I have lots of emails that I need to look at. See, we don't have that much music left. Hmm. I'm just looking at our next music options. Because I really like these, but the issue is that they're kind of short. What's the name of this? Jazz Hop Cafe. But the other ones look... I don't know. Do do do. Okay, we can continue. Chapter 2, A Strange Resemblance. Mrs. Owen was too excited and nervous to have any definite idea about what could be done to recover the lost pocketbook. She dared not leave the stand to aid in the search, for in a very few minutes it would be time for her to speak. How much of her speech she could remember without notes she could not guess. It was Nancy who hastened to find park workmen. She pushed her way through the crowds, closely followed by several officials. "There's not a chance we can find the handbag before the ceremonies begin," one of the men murmured. "It would be useless to try." Nancy did not bother to answer. Instead, she darted into a nearby building obviously used for housing park equipment. Fortune favored her, for she found two men inside who were cleaning their tools. Tersely, she told them about the lost pocketbook, earnestly requesting that they help her recover it from the bottom of the lake. "Not much chance of getting it, I'm afraid," one of the workmen responded as he went on scraping dirt from a spade. "It would take half a day to drag the lake, and even then the purse might not be found." "But I know exactly where it went down," Nancy insisted, becoming just slightly excited. "You don't understand. It's very important that I recover the pocketbook within a few minutes." Then, although valuable time was being consumed, she explained that the missing bag contained not only Mrs. Owen's notes, but a gift as well. "If you notice just where the purse fell, we might get it out," the older of the two workmen said, his attitude undergoing a sudden change. "But I doubt if it can be done before the ceremony starts." "Oh, we must have it before then," Nancy murmured. "Please try." "We'll do the best we can." The men then moved with alacrity, hauling out equipment which had been used the previous day to dredge leaves and debris from the lake bed. While they were loading it into a rowboat at the water's edge, Nancy hastened on ahead to the place where George and Bess were waiting. True to their friend's command, they had kept their eyes glued upon the spot where Togo had dropped the pocketbook. "I believe we'll salvage the purse after all," Nancy told her chums triumphantly. "Workmen are coming with a boat." "Why are they so slow?" Anxiously, she glanced up the shore and then peered nervously at her wristwatch. How swiftly the minutes were slipping away, and every second was precious. As the band stationed near the stands started to play, George gasped in dismay. "The ceremonies are beginning!" Nancy nodded soberly. "If the workmen don't find the handbag in time, and Mrs. Owen should fail in her speech, I'll feel that it is my fault." I think that's the end of the music.
I am incredibly proud to be a physician.
Okay, let me know if the volume's too high or anything like that. Okay. It was typical of Nancy Drew to blame herself, although many times no other person would think of considering her responsible. Certainly she could not be charged with Togo's wild prank. Ever conscientious and sympathetic, Nancy enjoyed lending a helping hand to anyone in trouble. This admirable trait frequently brought difficulties upon herself, and many an adventure had resulted from her desire to aid strangers. Recently, in attempting to befriend a small lad from India who had escaped from a cruel circus master, Nancy had become the professor of an odd elephant charm, a trinket which indirectly brought about a series of remarkable adventures known as the mystery of the ivory charm. The girl had come quite naturally by her love of adventure, for she was the daughter of Carson Drew, a well-known criminal lawyer who had won statewide renown through his ability to solve baffling mysteries. Nancy inherited his sleuthing ability, and it was through her father that she had secured her first successful case, one which concerned an old clock. I love this meta referencing going on. After her first thrilling plunge into the fascinating field of mystery and intrigue, one adventure followed another in rapid succession. As Hannah Gruen, the family housekeeper, often remarked, Nancy just couldn't be held down. Even Carson Drew sometimes feared that his only daughter's love for adventure might someday lead her into serious trouble. Although courageous, the girl never was recklessly so, for left motherless at an early age, she had developed amazing judgment. This quality was recognized and respected by the girl's many friends and classmates at River Heights. Bess and George, who lived in the same neighborhood, were proud of their chum and liked to say that they had shared in some of her exciting experiences. When you're with Nancy, interesting things always seem to happen, George frequently declared. Now, as she and Bess waited for the park workmen to come with their boat, they felt like voicing the sentiment again. "Oh, they're here at last!" Nancy cried in relief as she glimpsed the approaching craft. From the bank of the lake, she gave directions, indicating exactly where the men were to drag for the lost pocketbook. Nancy and her chums were so occupied that not until a fairly large crowd had gathered did they realize that their activities were attracting attention. "What has happened?" a woman asked Nancy, plucking at her sleeve. "Has someone gone down in the lake?" The girl shook her head, for she had no time in which to answer questions or offer a lengthy explanation. Other persons gathered along the shore, and soon many of them were saying that a child had been drowned. No, we're trying to recover a pocketbook," Bess corrected, but only a few persons were close enough to hear her. As the search went on, the crab grew in size until the girls feared that someone would be pushed into the water. Time after time they requested persons to move back, but always those behind surged forward again. Nancy felt someone touch her arm. Turning a trifle impatiently, she found herself face to face with a tried and true friend, Ned Nickerson, who looked worried. "Anything wrong?" he inquired. "Can I be of any help?" "Oh, Ned, try to keep these people back," said Nancy gratefully. "Tell them no one has been drowned." Ned did not annoy the girls with any useless questions. He ordered the crowd to move back, and his voice had a ring of authority which caused people to obey. Just then, a policeman came hurrying up to aid the young man in his task. "Oh, they found it!" Nancy cried suddenly, as one of the boatmen held an object aloft. "The bag has been brought up!" A moment later, the water-soaked purse was placed in her hands. "Oh, thank you for all your trouble," the Drew girl murmured gratefully. With a quick glance at her wristwatch, she pushed through the crowd, then started to run towards the stands, where Mrs. Owen was awaiting her. Bess and George explained the need of haste to Ned, and the three followed their friend at a more dignified pace. They quickly lost sight of her in the throng which milled near the stands, but knew that they would find her later. Unmindful of an arrogant usher who tried to block her path, Nancy slipped past him directly up to the speaker's stand, where Mrs. Owen was sitting. The woman's face brightened as she observed the girl's approach. Without disturbing any of the officials who were in the box, Mrs. Owen joined Nancy directly behind the wooden structure where they were out of sight from the audience. "Oh, you wonderful girl! You recovered my notes, my money, and my gift." Eagerly, Mrs. Owen took the purse, but as she removed the water-soaked papers, a look of horror returned to her face. The writing had been partially washed away. Yeah, what do you think? It was in a lake. And the papers threatened to tear at the touch of a finger. "Oh, I'm afraid they're ruined after all," the club woman murmured. "What shall I do? I can't take these dripping papers into the speaker's box, and I must have them." For a moment, Nancy feared all her haste had been in vain. Then, recalling that she had glimpsed an electric heater at a food stand nearby, it occurred to her that it might be possible to dry out the papers, which is not going to recover the ink. "How much time will there be before you speak?" she questioned tersely. "Only 5 minutes." Mrs. Owen glanced toward the speaker's box. "But that politician who's talking now may run on for a while." "He sounds as if he would," Nancy nodded with a smile. "I think we'll have time to dry these papers across the way." The attendant at the stand was only too glad to give Mrs. Owen and Nancy the use of the electric heater. Quickly, they emptied the handbag, spreading out all the notes as well as other papers. Nancy could not fail to notice that one of the items was a neatly clipped personal taken from a newspaper. Before it occurred to her that such an act might be prying, she had read the brief advertisement. Rexy, come home. All is forgiven. Alice. Nancy frequently had seen similar items in papers, but it struck her as unusual that a woman of Mrs. Owen's type should be interested in such a clipping. Had the woman herself inserted the appeal, or did it concern some acquaintance of hers? The Drew girl knew that in any case it was none of her affair. She had no time even to consider the matter, for the papers were nearly dry. Mrs. Owen hastily gathered them up, taking care to replace the personal item in her pocket. "Oh dear, everything has upset me so. I'm certain I shall make a dismal failure of this talk," she murmured nervously. "I can't read half of what I've written." "Perhaps I can help you," Nancy suggested kindly. "Try saying your speech over to me while I look at the notes. I'll prompt you." Mrs. Owen was able to give most of the talk without hesitation, and faltered at only a few places. Nancy listened intently, nodded encouragingly, and at the close thrust the notes back into the clubwoman's trembling hand. "You did splendidly, Mrs. Owen. I'm sure you'll have no trouble. And now I think you should hurry back, for the politician is just finishing." "I can't thank you enough for all you've done," Mrs. Owen murmured as she turned away. "I'll see you after the ceremonies, if I haven't collapsed by that time." Not without misgivings, Nancy watched the woman make her way to the platform. The girl looked about for a place to sit. Every seat was occupied, but she was able to station herself by a pillar barely a dozen feet from the speaker's box. Scarcely had she taken her post when Mrs. Owen was introduced. Outwardly, the woman appeared composed, but Nancy could tell that she was still nervous. The speaker began well, consulting her notes only at infrequent intervals. Nancy relaxed somewhat, and then, just as she felt that all would be smooth sailing, the woman faltered. She peered down at the words before her, seemingly unable to read them. Like a flash, the words which should come next entered Nancy's mind. She whispered them just loud enough for Mrs. Owen to hear. The woman understood, and taking heart, went on with her speech. Once toward the end, she nearly broke down, but was aided by Nancy's timely prompting. I need a dance command, too. Finally, she presented the gift, and as she finished, was greeted by a generous amount of hand clapping. Since Nancy had no seat, she soon grew tired of standing by the stone pillar, and moved away. As she was wandering toward one of the refreshment stands, she was joined by Ned and her chums, who had sighted her from afar. "Mrs. Owen didn't do half badly," Bess laughed. "I thought for a minute that she couldn't read her notes, and my heart leaped right up in my throat." "So did mine," Nancy confessed with a chuckle. She did not detract from Mrs. Owen's speech by revealing how she had aided the clubwoman. "I've had enough of speeches," Ned broke into the conversation. "Let's go over to the casino and have some ice cream." The girls quickly accepted the invitation, and presently all were enjoying refreshments in the exclusive amusement building. Afterwards, the young people indulged in a few of the games, and Nancy was delighted when her bowling score won a prize. "A box of stationery," Bess observed as the package was unwrapped. "I don't know what I'll do with it," Nancy replied. "I seldom have time to write letters anymore." "Oh, you'll have plenty of leisure time during your vacation," George responded carelessly. "Vacation?" Ned inquired quickly. "Are you going away, Nancy?" "Only for a few weeks, Ned. Dad has a little business to transact at Seacliff, so he said I could go along and take Bess and George with me." "Seacliff?" Ned repeated thoughtfully. "That's on the Atlantic coast, isn't it? I wish I could get there myself." Before the girls could make a response, Mrs. Owen came hastening toward them. The dedication exercises had ended some minutes earlier, and the crowd was dispersing. "Oh, here you are!" the clubwoman cried, addressing Nancy. "I searched everywhere for you. I want to tell you how wonderful you were to help me through my speech, and I'd like to know your name." "Nancy Drew." "Why, I've heard of you," Mrs. Owen replied in astonishment. Of course, I know your father by reputation. I should have failed completely today if you hadn't prompted me. I was afraid you might not be able to hear me whisper. Oh, I did, very distinctly, yet I'm confident the audience didn't catch on. Miss Drew, as you sat crouched there by the stone pillar, your pose was most arresting. My pose? Nancy asked, slightly bewildered. Yes, even in my frantic state of mind, I noticed it instantly. You reminded me of a marble statue I once saw, which was called the Whispering Girl. Tell me, did you ever do any modeling for a sculptor? Oh, no, Nancy answered, somewhat embarrassed because she saw that Ned and her chums were deeply impressed by the comparison Mrs. Owen had made. Oh, hi, Boo. Where's the statue, may I ask? The club woman's response was a surprising one. It's located at a place called Old Estate. I saw it years ago when I was visiting in Seacliff. End of chapter 2. Hi, Boo Boo. What you doing? Do you come to say hi? You finally wake up? I don't think she'd moved since I left for work. I came back and Boo demands attention. This is true. She really does. Welcome for clapping. Hi, Boo Boo. Good kitty. Yeah. You're a pretty kitty. She's so silly. What did I miss? You can find the handbag if you believed the sickest throwbacks. But at least the paper would be dry. Somebody prying. In Nancy Drew universe? Never. Oh, hello, Riddy. Welcome for clapping. How is your day going, Riddy? I'm digging this music. Claps for Riddy's clapping. And I'm gonna clap for you clapping for Riddy's clapping. I'm gonna keep going since we're kind of on a time limit. Okay, chapter 3, The Whispering Girl. This is very... Oh, okay, I got it. That was weird. Did I understand you to say Seacliff? Nancy inquired in astonishment. Yes, Mrs. Owen replied. It's a summer resort place along the Atlantic coast. Old Estate is located on the shore and was fallen into ruin when I last saw it. By this time, the house and the statue as well may have been washed into the sea. Oh, I hope not, Nancy said quickly, because I'd very much like to see it. My chums and I are leaving in a few days to spend a vacation at Seacliff. Then by all means, you must visit Old Estate to view yourself in marble. Mrs. Owen smiled. Your resemblance to the statue is really amazing, Miss Drew. I certainly shall see it, Nancy declared, and then asked the club woman how to reach Old Estate after arriving at Seacliff. The girl wrote down the directions on the back of an old envelope. Upon Mrs. Owen's request, she gave her own address in River Heights. The club woman was noting it in her little book when Bess suddenly gave an exclamation of dismay. Oh, look who's here! Togo! George cried with a laugh. He's trailed Nancy to the casino. The girls had congratulated themselves that they were free of the mischievous little dog, for after dropping Mrs. Owen's pocketbook in the lake, he had lost himself somewhere in the crowd. Now Togo stood in the entrance of the casino, looking alertly about him. Let's hope he doesn't see us, Nancy murmured. Even as she spoke, the terrier gave a joyful bark and bounded toward the young people. He darted directly in front of a dignified waiter with a heavily loaded tray and struck the man full force just below the knees. The waiter staggered about wildly in an effort to maintain his balance, then fell backward against the wall. His tray of dishes crashed to the floor. "Ah, what will Togo do next?" Bess wailed. "Let's get away from here before we are accused of being his owner." Escape, however, was out of the question, for the little dog, oblivious of the havoc he had wrought, came up to Nancy and leaped against her. Nearly everyone in the room turned to stare at the young people, much to their confusion. The manager of the place came toward the party angrily. "Dogs are not allowed in this casino," he said in freezing tones, addressing the embarrassed Nancy. "He isn't my dog, even if he does follow me around everywhere," she replied humbly. "Just get the animal out of here, that's all I ask," the manager answered grimly. He made a dive for Togo, who by this time had lost interest in Nancy and playfully was attacking another waiter. "I'll try," Nancy murmured contritely. "Come here, Togo," she ordered. The little animal came obediently to her side. She picked him up in her arms, and the party hastily left the casino. "So this was the little dog that took my handbag," Mrs. Owen laughed, giving the terrier a friendly pat. "He does manage to keep busy, doesn't he?" Nancy dropped the dog to the ground, and Ned chased him away to another section of the park. When the young man returned alone, Mrs. Owen was saying goodbye to Nancy and her chums. "I'm in favor of starting for home myself before Togo picks up my trail again," laughed Nancy. Ned had his car at the park and offered to drive the girls, but they declined, preferring to walk. At the Fane residence, Nancy took leave of George. A few minutes later, she was saying goodbye to Bess, when the latter gave a little squeal of consternation. "Oh, Nancy, here he comes again!" The girl turned to see Togo trotting down the sidewalk toward them. "The little pest!" she exclaimed. "What are we to do with him?" "What are you to do, you mean?" Bess corrected with a wicked chuckle. "He's your dog, not mine." She ran into the house and stood at the window, watching in amusement as Togo joyfully greeted his chosen mistress. With a sigh, Nancy walked on down the street, the terrier following closely at her heels. Reaching home, she slipped into the house, leaving the dog on the porch. Half an hour later, when she peered out, he was still there. "Oh, I'll just have to weaken," she decided, opening the door and allowing the pet to come in. "He's homeless and perhaps hungry." Mrs. Gruen, the housekeeper who had worked at the Drew residence so many years that she was regarded almost as a member of the family, came into the living room, halting abruptly when she saw the dog. "Nancy Drew, where on earth did you find that dirty little animal? You know I can't have him here muddying up the rugs." "I'll give Togo a bath," promised Nancy. "I think he'll be fairly presentable then." "Surely you're not thinking of keeping him?" "I don't seem to have any choice in the matter," Nancy laughed. "He trailed me all afternoon at the park. Poor little fellow, I imagine he's had nothing to eat for days." She had made a direct appeal to the housekeeper's sympathies, and as she hoped, Mrs. Gruen grudgingly went to the kitchen to find food for Togo. She softened somewhat as Nancy told her about the terrier's antics. "He seems to be a smart little dog," Mrs. Gruen admitted, "but if he's mischievous, I can't have him around." "Oh, I imagine it was only because he was so hungry," Nancy answered hastily. "He'll probably be very good from now on." "He'll eat as much as a grown person does." "You can give him some of my portion," Nancy smiled. "You see, since Togo followed me home, I really feel it is my duty to keep him until his master is found." "Your duty?" Mrs. Gruen laughed. "That's only an excuse you've thought up. You really like the scamp and hope his owner never does claim him again." The front door opened to admit Carson Drew. The lawyer dropped his briefcase carelessly on a chair. Before he could greet Nancy or the housekeeper, Togo had leaped up on him and tried to lick his hand. "Well, well, where did you come from?" Mr. Drew laughed. The voice of the lawyer seemed to excite the terrier even more. He ran madly about the room. Before Nancy could capture him, he had snatched the leather briefcase from the chair. The flap fell open and papers scattered over the room. "Just a nice little dog," Mrs. Gruen remarked with a tinge of sarcasm. "Togo is a bit impulsive," Nancy admitted, taking the briefcase away from him and picking up the scattered papers. "Why, Dad, what's this?" She indicated an envelope which bore the title Charles Owen. The surname had drawn her attention. Oh, a letter from one of my clients, the lawyer answered. It's not so important, but some of those other papers are. I don't want any of them to be lost. Nancy carefully replaced all the documents in the briefcase. Then, after having tied Togo outdoors, she told her father of her adventure that afternoon at the park. Mrs. Owen was very pleasant, Dad, she remarked, but I couldn't help thinking. That she has a mysterious background? Mr. Drew finished teasingly. I shouldn't have used exactly that expression, Nancy smiled, but you must admit it seems odd that she'd carry a personal item in her bag. Why? A bag is a personal item, so you would have personal items in your personal item. When I noticed that your client's name was Charles Owen, it occurred to me that they might be related. Oh, I doubt it, Nancy. Owen is a fairly common name, you know. Mr. Owen is connected with the firm Owen and Warmrath, located along the Atlantic coast. They have a small branch office in this state, too. I suppose my idea is rather fantastic, Nancy admitted. Oh well, even if Mrs. Owen were related to your client, it probably would have no significance. The girl promptly dismissed the matter from her mind and forgot about the club woman entirely until a few days later when a messenger delivered a large box of candy sent to her by Mrs. Owen as a token of her appreciation. Nancy wrote a note of thanks. What? The week slipped away so swiftly that almost before the girls realized it, they were boarding the train with Mr. Drew, bound for Seacliff and a happy vacation. I'll miss Togo, Nancy remarked to George and Bess as they all waited on the station platform. Mrs. Gruen didn't like the idea of watching out for him while Dad and I are away, but of course we couldn't take him along to Seacliff. He'd probably leave a trail of wreckage behind him, George chuckled. Togo isn't as bad as he was, Nancy replied with pride. I've been trying to train him. Trying is right, Mr. Drew cut in. You'll never conquer Togo, Nancy, so you may as well admit defeat at the start. The block signal had dropped, and a few minutes later the flyer came roaring into the station. Mr. Drew's party was hustled aboard by the conductor. This your dog? The train man demanded gruffly. Nancy glanced back in surprise and collapsed weakly against her father's arm. Togo, who evidently had broken his leash, followed the party to the station and leaped aboard the train just as it pulled out from the station. You can't have the dog in here, the conductor said sternly. He must go into the baggage car. Togo had very definite ideas of his own. Before either the conductor or Mr. Drew could capture him, he had scampered down the aisle. Deciding that he would like to sit beside an old lady in a flowing black cape who occupied a seat toward the front of the car, he leaped up alongside her. The woman dropped the book she was reading and gave a startled cry. She tried to push Togo away. The dog, thinking it was all in play, began to tear at her cloak, entangling himself in its generous folds. Togo! Nancy Drew cried furiously. She caught the dog, but his teeth held fast to the cape. As the garment billowed outward, the girl noticed an astonishing thing. The inside of the cape contained several pockets, heavily weighted down as if with money. The elderly woman jerked her cloak together, frowning severely at Nancy. I'm so sorry, the girl apologized. I hope Togo didn't bite you. No, answered the woman shortly, but please take him away. Nancy was only too glad to retreat with Togo, held firmly under her arm. As she walked down the aisle, she was the target of all eyes. However, she was scarcely aware of it, for her own attention had been drawn to a dark-haired young man who occupied the seat directly opposite the woman in the cape. He was a sharp, shrewd-looking individual, and Nancy was a little afraid that he, too, had seen the money which the old lady carried upon her person. She had no time just then to worry about it, for the conductor showed signs of making a great deal of trouble about Togo. Mr. Drew finally arranged for the dog to be taken to the baggage car. When the party was comfortably settled, Nancy told her chums about the hidden money which she had observed under the old lady's cloak, adding that she was afraid the man directly across the aisle had seen it too. He looks like a sharper, George observed, turning to stare at the person under discussion. His smile is innocent enough, but he has wicked eyes. What's a sharper? A swindler, especially at cards. Okay. Interesting. Also, thanks, Riddy. I don't know how to say your name, but, thanks for the compliment, I guess, but this is a family-friendly stream, so just, keep that in mind while you're in the channel for the read streams. But I'll get back to you guys in just a second. Let me finish the chapter. When the party was comfortably settled, Nancy told her chums about the hidden money, which she had... Oh, wait. Why? He's trying to attract that old lady's attention already, Bess added in alarm. Just what I feared he would do, Nancy declared, nodding. He'll manage to get into conversation with her, and the first thing we know her money will be gone. As the young people watched, the man moved over into the seat across the aisle and bowed politely to his occupant. Soon he was chatting pleasantly with the old lady, but as he talked, his eyes roved frequently to the cape. He is interested in her money, Nancy murmured anxiously. Oh dear, if he steals it, I'll feel responsible. When the conductor came through the car a few minutes later, she asked him if he knew either of the passengers. The old lady is Miss Morse from Seacliff, the train man responded. I've never seen the man before. Nancy felt that it was her duty to warn Miss Morse to be on her guard, yet obviously she could not talk with her until the young man should go back to his own seat. Then it might be too late. Mr. Drew had gone to the observation car, so she could not seek his advice. I'm going to take that section directly behind the couple and hear what they are saying, she indicated to her chums. We may have misjudged the man. She walked up the aisle and slid into the empty seat without attracting the attention of the pair just ahead. Miss Morse was staring fixedly at the strange young man, as if fascinated by his face. Yes, I thought from the moment I first set eyes upon you that we might be related, Mr. Mitza, Nancy heard her say. How fortunate that we chanced to meet. Fortunate indeed, thought Nancy. Mr. Mitza had trumped up that story to throw her off guard. From the snatches of conversation overheard, it was easy to tell that the unscrupulous young man deliberately was pumping information from Miss Morse regarding her personal affairs. Satisfied that she could do nothing about it just then, Nancy went back to her chums. An hour later, Alton Junction was reached, which was the point at which passengers bound for Seacliff must transfer to another train. As Mr. Drew and the girls left the car, Nancy observed that both Miss Morse and Mr. Mitza were gathering up their luggage. Oh, let me help you with your heavy bag, the Drew girl said quickly to the old lady, before the young man could make a similar offer. Joe Mitza scowled at Nancy. Since when do we know his first name? But she paid no attention to him, hurrying the elderly woman from the car. I've only a minute to talk, Nancy began in an undertone, but I want to give you a friendly warning. I'm very much afraid Mr. Mitza is interested in your money. I'd not have anything to do with him if I were you. Miss Morse stared angrily at the girl, her lips tightening into unpleasant lines. I'll think you to mind your own affairs, she said sharply. For years I've battled the world, and I'm still capable of looking after myself. End of chapter 3. Togo is a better sleuth than anyone. Boo Boo's so cute. Yeah. Hi, what are you doing? Playfully attacking another waiter. Might not be so cute if it were a Rottweiler or a Doberman. Dang, Nancy caught in her lie. She just laughed at the word duty. I also laughed at the word duty. That's a nice mod wall. Shame if someone broke it. Hi, Timo. Welcome for joining. Thank you for... Oh, you hugged yourself. That's so sweet. How are you? That's so funny. Card Sharp. Heyo. Hi, Corky. How are you? Good to see you. Ooh, cute kitty. Welcome for clapping. Hi, corgi butt. I think I need a dance command like V has, a dance counter. Although I feel like my counter thing is... I tried to do a car chase in indie books count, but I couldn't figure it out. Because I didn't know what the commands were for increasing and decreasing the count. And like what you need to do to add one. I don't know. I'll figure it out. Okay, let's continue. Try to get another chapter in. Chapter 4, A Warning Declined. Wait a second. We got a sound effect incoming. Wait for it. Wait for it. Why is it so delayed? That's weird. Oh, it's Angsty Roof. I'm sorry. I guess Emo Roof makes sense though too. It's Angsty Roof. No, you didn't break it. Okay. There it is. Okay, sorry. I didn't mean to interfere, Nancy said hastily. I merely thought, that is, in a way, if you should lose your money, it would be my fault because of the dog. She began to stammer, painfully aware of Miss Morse's increasing anger. Oh, now I recognize you. You're the girl with the ferocious dog. Well, scarcely ferocious, Nancy smiled. Togo is rather impulsive, but as I told you before, I'm very sorry he annoyed you. However, I'm not his owner. Miss Morse tossed her head indignantly, suggesting by her expression that she did not believe Nancy. She turned away coldly, and upon seeing Joe Mitza, who had alighted from the train, waved to him. Immediately the man hurried up, and with a sly, triumphant glance directed at the crestfallen Nancy, picked up Miss Morse's suitcase. The queer couple then walked away together. That is... I know it's 1937, but today the queer couple doesn't read the same way as it did in 1937. Just saying. Nancy looked about for her own party. She found her father and the girls exercising Togo, who had just been taken from the baggage car. Oh, cheer up, Mr. Drew advised his daughter kindly when he learned of the rebuff. You've done all you can. I imagine the old lady really is capable of taking care of her money. She appears to be a rather shrewd individual. Her tongue is sharp anyway, Nancy said ruefully. While Togo was allowed to trot up and down the station platform, held firmly by a suitcase strap which had been attached to his collar, Mr. Drew discussed with his daughter what should be done. Although he did not like to be annoyed with Togo at Seacliff, it seemed out of the question to return him to Hannah Gruen. I'll keep him under control somehow, Nancy promised with a laugh. Perhaps Togo will reform and be a good dog. While Mr. Drew arranged for the transfer to another train, the girls idled about the platform, allowing the animal to pull them from one spot to another. A child unexpectedly separated herself from her nurse and ran excitedly toward the dog. "Jester! Jester!" she cried joyfully, gathering the terrier into her arms. Nancy and her chums were nonplussed. They did not know what to make of the situation. "He's my dog," the little girl declared, trying to take the leash from Nancy's hand. "Let me have him." "Why, certainly, if he's your pet," Nancy agreed, her heart sinking. She had not realized until now how fond she was of Togo, and that it would be hard for her to give him up. Jester ran away about a month ago, and I've looked everywhere for him, the child went on, gazing at the girls a trifle accusingly. Just at that moment, the nurse appeared. She frowned in perplexity as she gazed at the terrier which her young charge claimed. "Are you certain this dog is Jester, Barbara?" she asked doubtfully. "It looks like your pet, but you know we thought Jester had been run over by an automobile." "This is Jester," the child insisted stubbornly. "I want him back." "Togo doesn't seem to know you," Nancy observed. "I admit the dog is a stray, but I found him a long distance from here, at River Heights." "You're just saying that because you don't want to give me my dog," the child stormed. "You found Jester right here in Alton Junction. I know you did." "I can prove that he came from River Heights," Nancy insisted, growing irritated. "Here comes my father, and he'll tell you the same thing." Carson Drew listened with a sympathetic ear to the child's claim, but said kindly that he felt certain that Togo could not be the lost Jester, for River Heights was too far away for the dog to have strayed such a distance. "I'll call my mother and she'll make you give up the dog," the child screamed furiously. "Mother! Mother!" A tall, well-dressed woman, beautifully groomed, came up haughtily to confront Nancy and her friends. "What is it, Barbara dear?" she asked the child. "I found my dog, Mother, and these mean people say I can't have him." "What we said," began Mr. Drew politely, but the woman cut him short. "Give the child her dog instantly, or I shall call the police and have you arrested for theft." "Call the police?" Mr. Drew challenged, for now he would not have relinquished Togo under any circumstances. "You'll not get the terrier unless you can prove that you own him." Nancy and her chums thought the woman was only bluffing, but they were mistaken. She did summon an officer, and for a few minutes it appeared as if Togo must be given up, for the policeman tended to side with Mrs. Hastings, a well-to-do resident of Alton Junction. However, Carson Drew calmly took the group to the baggage car. Through the testimony of the man in charge, he was able to prove that Togo had been brought from River Heights. Then he handed one of the officers his card. "You're Carson Drew, the lawyer?" the man asked in surprise. Upon receiving a curt nod, he added with an abrupt change of tone, Well, I never thought I'd meet you, Mr. Drew. I've heard about your work." "We're in a hurry to catch a train," the attorney interrupted. "What about the dog? Do we keep him or don't we?" "Yes, it's obvious the little girl is mistaken. I'm sorry you were delayed, Mr. Drew." Mrs. Hastings might have offered a similar apology, but with an angry toss of her head, she caught Barbara by the hand and marched away. "We lost a wonderful chance to get rid of Togo," Mr. Drew chuckled as the party hurried to find the Seacliff train. "Not sorry, are you, Nancy?" "I want Togo to have a good master," the girl replied. "That's why I hope to keep him myself for a while." Mr. Drew and his party boarded the train only a minute before it left the station. Toward the rear of the car, Nancy observed Miss Morse and Mr. Mitza chatting together like old friends, but she gave no outward indication that she was interested in the pair. When they finally reached Seacliff, she lost sight of the couple at the station. A taxicab carried Mr. Drew, the girls, and Togo to one of the leading hotels located along the ocean front. On being assigned to the room which she would share with George and Bess, Nancy's first act was to throw open the window and breathe deeply of the salty air. "Just listen to the pounding of the waves against the rocks," she exclaimed. "I love the ocean." "We'll have a wonderful time here," George declared gaily. "How long do you think we can stay, Nancy?" "It's hard to tell. Everything depends on how long it takes Dad to attend to the business that brought him here." "I hope it requires a month," Bess laughed. "Not wishing your father any bad luck, of course." Togo had been established in a kennel at the back of the hotel, and as soon as the girls unpacked their suitcases, they went downstairs to learn how he was getting along. The terrier seemed perfectly satisfied in his new quarters, and was munching upon a juicy bone which the hotel chef had given him. The girls walked down to the beach, but felt unequal to a swim. So soon after their long train ride, they were content to feast their eyes upon the view. At breakfast the next morning, Mr. Drew told Nancy that he would be absent from Seacliff for a day or two. This was not a surprise to her, for he had explained before they made the trip that business would take him away from the summer resort city. "We'll manage to amuse ourselves while you're gone," she smiled. "Don't hurry back." "You're not by any chance anxious to get rid of me?" the lawyer asked teasingly. "You know better, Dad," Nancy laughed. "Togo may become mischievous again, and if so, we may need you to bail us out of jail." After Mr. Drew had gone, the girls ventured to ask the hotel clerk if he knew of a place called the Old Estate in the vicinity of Seacliff. It was their intention to view the Whispering Girl statue at the first opportunity. "I'm not sure just which place you mean," the man replied in perplexity. "There are so many ancient estates around Seacliff. I'll make a few inquiries and perhaps have definite information for you this afternoon." Nancy thanked the clerk and was about to turn away when another question popped into her mind. "Oh, by the way," she asked carelessly, "do you know where Miss Morse lives?" "Miss Morse?" "Yes, I believe she's a rather wealthy resident of Seacliff. Her first name is Fanny, I think." "Oh, her first name is Fanny, I think," Bess supplied eagerly. She had gleaned this scrap of information herself from the train conductor. "Never heard of anyone by that name living here," the clerk returned. He began to sort out mail, so the girls moved away. "I can't understand it," Bess murmured as she sat down beside the other two on a bench overlooking the ocean. "Do you suppose our information about Miss Morse was incorrect?" "I'd think the conductor had been mistaken," Nancy admitted slowly. "Only I heard Miss Morse tell Joe Mitza the very same thing, that she lived here in Seacliff." After a while, the girls walked down to the business section of the little city, stopping to transact purchases at several stores on the pretext of making further inquiry about Miss Morse. No one had heard of the woman. "If Miss Morse is as wealthy as she appeared to be, surely she'd be known here," George commented thoughtfully. "She was a queer type," Nancy said slowly. "It occurred to me that she might be playing a hoax upon Mitza." "Why, Nancy," Bess said in quick protest, "you thought it was the other way around at first. You were afraid Mitza might be after Miss Morse's money." "I do sound inconsistent," Nancy admitted, laughing. "But the truth is, I've altered my opinion somewhat. I believe now that Miss Morse is a shrewd person who, to use her own words, is capable of looking after herself." End of chapter 4. Well, that's interesting because I was kind of thinking maybe they were in on it together. And we're gonna, ooh, V is live. I don't know. We're gonna cheat other train customers out of their money. I don't know. I was too lazy to check the commands. That's fine. Togo is impulsive. This is already way different from my version. Oh, yeah. What kinds of things did they change? There was no train or Togo stuff at all. Really? So there was no introduction of how Nancy got Togo? This is Air Bud all over again. Good luck with the rest of the stream. Gotta drive. Okay. Thanks for being here, Riddy. Be safe on your drive. V is live, so if you guys would like to raid, let's go do that. Oops. And, I will probably be live tomorrow. Don't know which game yet. If you guys would like to raid, could I see Sesame in the chat? Oops. With a capital S. Sesame Wade. V is not on stream yet, so I'm gonna wait a second before we go over and raid. We got, I guess, Terry, I'm gonna count you. We got two raiders. Thanks. So we read 4 chapters, which was about 45 pages. That's not bad. Here's the raid message if you want to copy that over when you guess you count. No, you definitely count. I was just saying the way you did that there. You count. You very much count. Alright, V is on screen. Let's raid V Budkey, and I will see you guys tomorrow sometime in the afternoon. I'll let you know on Discord, Twitter, all that fun stuff. Okay, bye!